Perfect. So welcome to RCM 12, and I would be the one doing your VA analysis for this, right? So RCM 12 VA is what we are going to discuss. Obviously, I'll help you to solve these questions, and once we're done with this, a couple of us together will take the detailed session of what question should have been attempted and what question should have been left. Let's see. I really felt that the VA was moderate to difficult here. Let's see. Long ago, in the ancient bosom, in the ancient world of the human animal sturdiness happened, a quickening of thought and tenderness at the sheer beauty of the world, a earning, a propensity, a likelihood to fathom, to find out the forces and phenomena behind the enchantment of birdsong and bloom. So what we were trying to do here is, if you see, we are talking about long ago, and some part of the world we were trying to find out what? That there must have been some kind of interaction between human and animal, right? And because there was an ancient bosom, there was something good happening. What happened was our thoughts happened to quicken. Thoughts happened to quicken. Correct? Quicken at what? Of tenderness at the sheer beauty of the world. So we're kind of assuming that human animal bosom is actually a representation of beauty of the world. And do you not think from here till here, these are all nothing but examples of what we were trying to find out answers to, right? So if this is what we're trying to find out the answers to as examples, maybe on a para summary, these might not be included in your answers, right? So I can actually start reading it from here. When we made language to tell each other of the wonder of the world, we called that quickening science. So we probably have made language to what? To probably understand the thought and tenderness of the sheer beauty of the world. So these are the couple of keywords that I'll keep in my mind. But now here is a contrast. Now, if there is a contrast, this is going to be super important for us. But our love of beauty grew aged with a lust for power. So thought happened to quicken, and there are examples, and the author was probably putting them as positive, and then he's changed this to negative by saying it became a lust for power that sent our signs on what Bertrand Russell perceptively rude, talked about in anger maybe, a passage from contemplation, which was more about thinking, to manipulation, which is more about lust for power. The road fogged. Fogged is something that we eat, the kata here, right? So we probably, I do not know whether I want to go to this side or whether I want to go to this side. So I'm probably going to talk about the road fogged between plus and minus. Let's see. Between knowledge as a technology of control, power, and knowledge as a technology of acceptance of beauty, of cherishing, and understanding reality on its own terms, right? And decoding those terms, finding out so that they can be met rather than manipulated. So the second half of the paragraph is nothing but power versus acceptance. So a great option on para summary would be something that talks about some positivity at the start and then talks about power and the fact that humanity is tied up between the two. We've gotten to a good kind of pre-thinking. Let's see. Instead of understanding and appreciating the natural world, humans have started manipulating it. Instead of understanding, so this kind of construction is nothing, but this is instead of x, comma, y. So what we are trying to do here is we are saying that rather than doing this, we have started to do this. An option that I did keep on hold because it was the first option, and remember I'm giving this in all the anxiety control measures. I could say have started manipulating it, though I would probably want a word that probably puts this power versus acceptance. That's the kind of word I would be more happy about, and that I am fixated to choose one between of this, right? Fixated to choose between power versus acceptance of the natural world. Again, I really think that the word beauty is also missing yet, but I would still keep this option on hold. It is important to balance our intellectual pursuits with ethical considerations. Not talking about ethical, you might think nature is ethical, we should respect it. But from a para-summary perspective, this is irrelevant, right? Slightly out of the scope, so irrelevant /OOS. Science began, we're talking about the earlier days, the bosom days, began with the quest for understanding and beauty, understanding the nature-human relationship, but evolved into a means of control. Control, power, understanding and beauty is acceptance. So very clearly, 3 option defeats option number 1, and therefore I will reject option number 1 now. The desire to control nature and harness knowledge for power has led to a utilitarian approach to science. It doesn't talk about what did we start with. It leads to utilitarian approach, which has never been discussed in the passage at all. So this was an easy elimination. I should have ideally quickly eliminated options 2 and 4. Maybe struggled a little between 1 versus 3, but there were enough hints about understanding the paragraph that might have clearly helped you pick option number 3 over option number 1, resulting in the official answer being 3. I think the options were easier. The paragraph was slightly difficult to understand. But remember, if you could pick that but and how the ideas have contrasted where the explicit claims of author is there, you could probably take a lot of advantage out of there. The classification for this question for me would be moderate to difficult. I won't say difficult, but I would do a moderate to difficult. Let's go to the next para summary. So what does it say here is, while the death of a loved one can make the notion of moving on unfathomable is something that you might not be able to think. So when you lose someone who was very loved one, you might think I might not be able to get over his or her death at any point of time. It also makes it by definition, remember, not in maybe practical terms, inevitable, unavoidable. Why? There is no other recourse because the person has died, because such loss is unambiguous. It's clear that someone has died and irreversible because you cannot bring anyone back to life. But again, important word here, but there is a species of grief spawned, filled of a type of loss that is more ambiguous and elastic. Ambiguous is something which is not clear. Elastic is something which is flexible. So might be reversed, might at least be changed. That muddles the notion of, that swamps, that disturbs the notion of moving on into an impassable, something that you cannot pass, and disorienting is something that might struggle you. Swamp is the daldal. The cyclical grief, so I'm probably getting to somewhere else. The cyclical grief of loving someone on the grounds of their highest nature, so mushy love here, and watching them fall short of it over and over. So they probably, you want them to move here, you would love them to the fact that they are, but they're not able to touch this point, right? Watching them fall short of it over and over in damaging and hurtful ways. So that feeling of loving someone where you want them to be on the grounds of their highest nature, but they're not able to touch that, and you're damaged and hurt, which you excuse over and over, is because they kind of do what? They have this impassioned apologies. They come to you and say, we'll try, and vows of reform, they come back and tell you that they would try to reform. Or because of the partly noble, partly naive, the author is probably trying to put the blame on you, that a truly magnanimous is someone who's large-hearted, right? So magnanimous is someone who is large-hearted person, is one that always has the breadth of spirit to forgive, a notion rooted in a basic misapprehension of what forgiveness really means. So the author is trying to say that forgiveness is not actually being a magnanimous person, someone who always has the breadth of spirit to forgive. So very honestly, have we moved from the concept of death, something that we discussed in the initial 3-4 lines, to a more ambiguous, right? To a more ambiguous plus elastic form, where it was more about loving someone and still being hurt Why? is because these guys fall short of what? Short of what you are putting them to. And you have been excusing over and over because they are apologizing, they are saying that they would change, or because naive notion that you have to be large-hearted person and therefore you need to forgive someone. So what I mean to say here is, on a para summary, I think the death part can be covered in a slightly small manner, but the most part of the paragraph would probably move from here. So an ambiguous, elastic, loving someone, still being hurt, and the naive notion, these are the keywords that I would supremely try to find out in an option. Let's see if we are good with this, right? Let's go to the options now. The death of a loved one is a clear and irreversible event. This makes sense. So there is no choice but to accept it. This only talks about the loved one part. It doesn't talk about the part beyond but. So very, very narrow. This was an easy elimination for us. So too narrow and a very easy elimination. A truly magnanimous person should be able to forgive endlessly. Again narrow. I do agree that truly magnanimous person was being talked about in the last sentence, but I think a para summary option should probably talk more about naive notions and all that stuff. Also, it does not talk about death in general. So I would still classify this option as what? Too narrow. The cyclicity of loving someone on their highest point, they not being able to meet, are the points that I'm very sure going to look in an option. Forgiving is less about a clear-cut acceptance and more about navigating a complex emotional landscape. Unnecessarily justification of words like clear-cut acceptance, navigating a complex emotional landscape, eliminated. Cyclical grief, we did talk about cyclical grief of loving someone, then they falling short, they apologizing, you loving them back, they still apologizing. It's a cyclic that you're running through. From loving someone who repeatedly disappoints is complex. Well, I did not really like this word complex, but because there were different reactions, there were different vows, apologies coming in, here is a word that I might not feel very bad about. Also, if you see, I've always been focusing on saying that you pick the best of the options. Do you not realize it at least talks about cyclical grief? From loving someone and repeatedly disappoint was being talked about very clearly because they were falling short of what you were expecting them to be. The best answer here was option number 4. I would have absolutely done this question on process of elimination, and I would still call this question as moderate because I've been very clear on finding the scope of the author after the word but here. Correct? But however, so if there's an idea contrast, you would most likely see the context being set here, and then you would talk about the author's claim here. So the best answer here is option number 4. Let's go to the next one. Parajumble. The 4 sentences given below, when properly sequenced, would yield a coherent paragraph. Decide on the proper sequence. It is to spoil by way of sheer ontology the very unspoiledness you're there to experience. What is to spoil? You might ask the question, what is to spoil? And you should probably see a context being set before it, right? It is in lines and gridlock and transaction after transaction to confront a dimension of yourself that is as inescapable as it is painful. What is in lines to confront a dimension of yourself you're there to experience? So for sentence number 2 also, you need to have a context before this. I was very clear I had to find a context and I did it here. So I said maybe I should rush on to read sentence number 4. Let's read this. To be a mass tourist for me, the author is coming in, is to become a pure late date American. What? Alien, ignorant, greedy for something you cannot ever have, disappointed in a way you can never admit. So what is he saying is, become a pure late date American. Who is a pure late date American? Alien, ignorant, greedy for something you cannot ever have, and disappointed in a way you can never admit. So you're saying it is to impose yourself, and here is a suggestion for you. Here is a yourself, right? Here is about, suggestion is about you, and then you are there to experience. So let's see. It is to spoil by way of sheer ontology the very unspoiledness you're there, where you're actually going to be a tourist. And then if you see, it is in lines of gridlock and transaction to confront a dimension. It talks about an outcome. So first up, you need to talk about the problem here. So I was very sure that the paragraph will start with 4. And then it says it is to impose yourself. See, impose yourself on places. Places is specific to talking about there. So can I not say that 1 is slightly more general to 3 and therefore this is something you might go with? Let's read this. It is to spoil the very unspoiledness you're there to experience. You're greedy for something you can never ever have, disappointed. And then it is to impose yourself. So how would you spoil the very unspoiledness there? By imposing yourself in all economic ways, right? That in all non-economic ways would be better, realer without you, correct? And then it is in lines and gridlock and transaction to confront, that is as inescapable as it is painful. So 4132. This is a parajumble that I would definitely leave, because see, I agree that there is an it here, there is an it here, there is an it here, but it was very, very difficult to find out a specific relationship between these 3 sentences. I was very easily able to make out the starting sentence, the introductory sentence. I maybe would have talked about 4.1 because it continues to talk about the negative way, but it would have taken a lot of time. And then again we're extending the same thing, right? It is to impose that in all non-economic ways would be. So how would you spoil it? By imposing yourself, and the author is saying the places would be better without you. So you need to experience first and then the suggestion would come in. And then he's saying it is in lines and gridlock and transaction to confront a dimension. That the fact that these places would be better non-economically without you is transaction after transaction. A definitely leave question, and I would have not wasted my time on this. Let's go to the next question. We're still on Parajumble. Let's see. Lubitkin once wrote that his buildings cry for a world which has never come into being, okay? But its modernist revolution has fared less well. So it needs to refer to something, right? Plus we also need to show that it might have fared well. So 2 things here. 1, I need to get a noun and I need to have some kind of implied thinking of something at least faring better than what? Modernist revolution, right? Fared better. Britain's social revolution has moved on. So this could be the context setting of the paragraph, right? Today London Zoo's website bears the banner, some penguins are gay, get over it. So isn't this what social revolution is being defined as? Because it has moved on. This is an example of some penguins are gay, don't bother with it, get over it. So 3, 4 kind of makes sense, and then 2 might have made sense here. Now we need to see whether this is an example of social revolution being moved on, or it is about modernist revolution not faring as well as social revolution is. It says his buildings cry for a world which has never come into being. So cry for a world which has never come into being, and talking about these with respect to buildings would most likely touch what? Touch about modernity, that the world has never come into being, and I could say that this is an example of a revolution that has not fared as well as social revolution being moved on. So I could simply say that 1 is a specific example of something being mentioned in 2, and therefore this becomes your final parajumble. I would have said that this was moderate. However, I'll keep on saying the fact that this is an example of modernist revolution would have taken some time for you, but I would have gotten this, and I would keep this particular parajumble under moderate. So on 2 para summary, I might have gotten 1. On 2 parajumble, I might have gotten 1 here again. This is something I was talking about. Let's look at the para summary. So blank 1, blank 2, blank 3, blank 4. Why am I saying this is? Because in some of these mocks, you might see this hierarchy being disturbed. And because you think others are being rude, you become more likely to behave rudely yourself. Fair enough. In a series of studies, my colleagues and I found evidence that rudeness can become contagious through a non-conscious automatic pathway. In a series of studies, they found evidence what? That rudeness, so the keyword here is rudeness plus contagious. Is this being explained in this? And because you think others are being rude, you become more likely. And you say when you experience rudeness, What happens here is non-conscious automatic is, look at this line. When you experience rudeness, the part of your brain responsible for processing rudeness wakes up a little bit and you become a little more sensitive to rudeness. Isn't this line an explanation of how it is becoming contagious through a non-conscious automatic pathway? So if I put this particular sentence at position number 1, it's a break to the logical continuity of the sentences. So not going to be an answer. This means that you're likely to notice more rude cues. Cues are signals in your environment. This is about you, right? And also to interpret ambiguous interactions as rude. For example, if someone said, hey, nice shoes, you might normally interpret that as a compliment. If you have recently experienced rudeness, you're more likely to think that person is insulting you. Isn't this an example of cues in your environment? Again, there is an example and there is a theory. You would unnecessarily not want to break it by writing this sentence. So 2 is also breaking the logical flaw and I would remove this. Then it says 3, that is you see more rudeness around you, or at least you think you do. Isn't this a generalized version of this example here? So here as I'm moving, I set the context, right? Then I gave an example and then I'm trying to summarize it again. So fair enough. Again, if you see that sentence number, whatever we have to fill it at position number 3 is again breaking the logical flow. And we've almost moved to the summary of it. And then if you see, and because you think others are being rude, you become more likely to behave rudely yourself. Continues the summary part. You could have introduced the paragraph with this if there was no and there was no because. But because it sounded very general and we've already moved to the generalized version of what we were trying to say, the best option, the best place where you would have probably put this sentence is in position number 4. So this was position number 4. Again, I did purely by a process of elimination. You should have done this by process of elimination. And I would say that this question was fairly doable. On a para completion, this was fairly doable. Let's go to the next one, which I think is an odd one out. So you do realize that 1 to 5 sentences, 4 will form a paragraph and 1 will be slightly out of the context. Let's see. Most people, when they think about expansion, think about it the same way you would think about an explosion. So what we are trying to say here is that expansion is almost equal to what? Explosion, right? Fair enough. These are all examples, right? A series of shrapnel moving outward in all directions, all emanating is emerging, right? All emerging from the same point of origin but at different speeds. For one, there is no point of origin for cosmic expansion. The universe appears to expand equally for all observers. But how it can be constant? It might refer to universe. If the expansion is accelerating, to start, we should ask ourselves what it even means that the universe is expanding. See, it says, so while I was doing this, I said maybe, how can it be a constant? I could start the paragraph with this. Do not just get into that mindset that a paragraph cannot start with but. We have done that in number of times in the classes, right? To start, we should ask ourselves what it even means that the universe is expanding. I might think that 4 is answering 3. When I say how can it be constant, maybe we are trying to get in the process. But you see, even if you're thinking that it is actually a universe, this sentence is talking about universe, right? Plus expansion, plus the characteristic that we are talking about is the word accelerating. Whereas what it even means that the universe is expanding. Here we are actually talking about universe plus expanding. These are 2 different words. So just do not even try to match these 2 words. Remember, universe accelerating, expansion is different from universe purely expanding. Although that is correct for an explosion, that is not at all how the expanding universe works. So if you see, I think for one, this is a specific. Most people when they think about expansion could relate to this. Also, that is not all how the expanding universe works. This is also about expanding universe. Maybe I have my answer, which is option number 3. But let me do this in a slightly more detailed manner. To start, this is setting the context. To start, we should ask ourselves what it even means that the universe is expanding. Right? How do we doing it? For most people, when they think about expansion, maybe this is where the context is being elaborated. Think about it the same way you would think about an explosion. Although that is correct for an explosion, I was very clear that 1, 5 is a very necessary pair and 4 was introducing the context. For 1, there is no point of origin, the universe expands. Unnecessarily, the expansion accelerate could be core relevant to the larger idea, but to the fact that universe is expanding is not the larger idea that this particular sentence would fit in. So 4152 was a paragraph that I was willing to give my shot at, and therefore 3 becomes your out of the scope, or you would say an odd one out, and the official answer is 3. I would still keep this question in the doable front. Let's go to the next one. Perfect. We're still back to odd one out. But I do think that my dreams identify probabilistic patterns in my experiences that in the past were used to predict experiences at landmark places. Okay, so dreams about probabilistic, again dreams predict. While we cannot say that dreams come true, we can say that they predict. Very clearly, I might want to start the paragraph with 2. 1 anyway is talking about dream plus predict, dream plus predict. But if you don't share my experiences, I don't think you can interpret my dreams. This is not about dreams prediction, but this is more about dreams plus interpret. The paragraph can go and talk about interpretation maybe, but I need to probably talk about the jump from prediction to interpretation. And if you think about it, dreams can also predict how I will act in certain situations because I unconsciously anticipate their consequences. Again, isn't this about dreams plus predict? Right? Let's see. I don't believe that I will ever walk along a suburban street, see a house mothered in sand and feel afraid. While we can't say, we can say that they predict. I don't believe, but there is something that he might believe in. So do you realize that 5-1 is a pair that I would be very happy with? Because it says, here is something I might not believe, but here is something I might believe, that it identifies probabilistic patterns. So I will ever walk is different from saying probabilistic. So 2-5-1 is probably a pair I would be happy about. And if you think about dreams can also predict what they can predict, and is a keyword connector, dreams can also predict. So I was very sure that 2-5-1-4 is going to be a great pair for me. 2 at least talks about something, 2 is the introduction here. So 2-5-1-4 is a pair that I'm looking forward to. 3, if you see, talks about sharing your experiences, interpreting it, whereas the larger part of the paragraph was about dreams plus predictability, and therefore the overall answer here would be sentence number 3. Again, I would still say doable if you were able to identify dream plus prediction here. Let's go to the last question. Again, a para completion is where we'll end with. The taboo, again swearing, is it seems a pretty serious matter. Can start the paragraph, but after this I would anticipate that this is actually being explained. Let's see. The philosopher Joel Feinberg remarked that swear words acquire their strong expressive power in virtue of an almost paradoxical tension between powerful taboo and universal readiness to disobey. Is this really explaining the fact that it's a serious matter? Not really. I think this particular sentence is also setting the context. While I was very, very happy to put this as the starting sentence, I told you, right, that the sentence after this, when I say after this, the place 1 should explain how is this a pretty serious matter, which is absolutely not being done. So what I would do is position number 1 is eliminated. And indeed, both in the UK and in many other cultures, we do much to prevent, censor and punish swearing because it has a paradoxical tension and therefore you're trying to do something. This is often done informally, is prevent, censor and punish. Perhaps the most effective way of regulating swearing is through our awareness of attitude towards it. Knowing that we face disapproval if we swear in the wrong context is effective, but there are formal efforts. So this is awareness of attitudes being explained, right? So 2 is eliminated because and indeed becomes a specific example of how are we trying to prevent the fact that it is a paradox. So 2 is eliminated. 3 also doesn't seem to fit in because we're talking about how are we actually awareing our attitude. So there are 2 ways. One is knowing that we face disapproval from others is effective. And he's also saying there are other formal efforts to pull is swearing too. Swearing can get you fired from your job, fined, censored, and even arrested. The taboo, again, we're trying to summarize it because you can get fired from your job, fined, censored. It seems a pretty serious matter. So 4 is your answer. Now remember, this is one place where I struggled. I was very sure that it might come in at 1 because we have almost thought of moving from general to specific. But remember, you being very specific here, and on the last of the paragraph, you can again, what you could do is you can move from general to specific, and then summarize the paragraph by being general again in the last. And because this particular sentence was not extending this, 4 was the best fit choice. And I would still say that this paragraph on the question front was doable. So we'll do a quick complete analysis of RC plus VA in a different video, or we'll do a YouTube session and you'll get to know on the admin group. I hope you fared well in this mock. We'll keep on doing this open mocks and evaluating you guys before your CAT multiple times. Thank you.